You want to be authentic. You want to know that whatever it is that you have to say, you've said it well, that you've said it the best way you can. I think it goes to the question of authenticity and speaking from your heart. When you're speaking, you have to imagine people in their chairs looking at you. Who is there? The ability to communicate well is something that we all need, no matter what profession we choose. I'm always encouraging, particularly business leaders, to step out. It's a little uncomfortable at times, but to bring your whole person to your pitches, who you are, why you do this. Social media is all about brand and authenticity.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Brilliant. I'm your host, Tristan. I've got Terry Szuplat with me. He has written a great book, Say It Well. This is what we're going to talk about. I mean, Terry, you could have gone so many different ways with the title, because I finished reading the book and I was like, dude, this is so much more than Say It Well. There's so much that I got from it. I don't know where to start. How did you end up with the title?
Sure. I appreciate that. It's interesting. I very much had a different title in my head as I was working on it, but there were various legal reasons. I was told I couldn't use that. So I always knew that I wanted the title to somehow convey the compliment, the spirit that we all want to get after we give a presentation at work, after we make a pitch, after we give a speech, a toast, a eulogy. What are the things that people say to us? What are the compliments we like? What's the feeling that we want to have when we're done? And the Sylvia Plath quote that it's borrowed from, I think really spoke to the spirit of the book, which is you want to be authentic. You want to know that whatever it is that you have to say, you've said it well, that you've said it the best way you can. So that's where it comes from, a Sylvia Plath passage that's in the book, and I think it speaks to, again, we can talk about this, but I think it goes to the question of authenticity and speaking from your heart.
Yeah, that is actually the essence of the book. You just summarized it in a sentence. This was great. The audience in your head, because I know in the book you specifically say that you have, this could be for anybody, for an interview, for a toast, for an actual speech, for whatever. But in your head, who are you thinking as the audience was? As you're writing it, you're like, who's my audience? Who's going to benefit the most from this?
Right. One of the things that we always talk about in speechwriting, and I advise people when I help them, when I consult with them, is you do have to imagine your audience, visualize them. I had to, when you're speaking, you have to imagine the people in their chairs looking at you. Who is there? Same thing with a book. I imagine people sitting there and reading. So to be honest with you, I actually envisioned this. I tried very hard to make this a book for everybody. So I imagined a veteran executive, a leader who's running an organization, a company reading this book. I imagine the executive team reading the book. I imagine the employees reading the book, because we all are communicators. We all represent our companies, our organizations. We all have to say it well when it comes to the work we do. I envisioned parents reading it for how to communicate with their children. I envisioned children, young people reading it, teenagers, young professionals in their early 20s and 30s. The ability to communicate well is something that we all need, no matter what profession we choose. So I imagined everybody reading. And actually, one of the things that I've been most thrilled about is I've heard a lot of parents saying, I'm reading this book, I gave it to my kids, or kids giving it to their parents. So I very much did try to write this. That's a hard thing to do, right? It's not, I don't see it as a niche book for only one kind of person. And the feedback that I've been getting, I've been thrilled about, because again, if you're a 25-year-old just starting out your career, or you're a 60-year-old leading an organization, you're trying to get better, I've heard from all kinds of folks, and I'm thrilled that they all find it useful, and that the lessons make them better speakers, better communicators, better leaders.
All right. So on that, when you started off and you said, I envision a veteran executive, and then you went down the list.
Okay.
I was thinking, by the way, I loved your book. I love the way you wrote it out, because I instantly thought of your uncle from Boston in that whole section where you're like, he's not a Democrat for sure. This guy's on the other side of the fence. And you're like, but that's who I felt like I was writing my not your speech, but Obama's speech, right, for. Can you tell me and take us through that story? Because I thought that just, to me, it really reiterated how important it is for me to say, who is going to be the person I'm talking to when I'm writing?
Right. So a lot of what I've tried to do in this book is take the experiences that I had as a speechwriter in the White House, in my case for President Obama, and translate that to our lives. Now, I always say people, I realize it'd be a little bit of a jump to say, well, here's what a president of the United States did. You can do it too. Well, president of the United States has had a lot of training. President of the United States has a whole team of speechwriters, of which I was one. We don't have that. So what I was trying to do as much as I could is say, here's what we were doing at the White House. Here's how you can do it in your own life without the benefit of a team around you, but maybe with the benefit of this book. And one of the stories I tell is, after the Boston Marathon bombing. I grew up in Massachusetts, had a lot of family and friends still there. So after that, when we heard that the president was going to go speak at the memorial, I asked if I could be the lead speechwriter and work with the president on that. And one of the things I've always tried to do when I write, when I speak, and this is a lesson that I share in the book, is I encourage people to really imagine and visualize not a massive crowd that you're speaking to, 50, 500, 1,000 people. That's hard to do. But just pick one person, maybe in that audience, a real person, and try to write the speech or give the presentation for them. Try to connect with them. Just connect with one person, and you'll probably connect with the whole room or many people in the room. So all that week when I was working on the Boston Marathon Memorial with the president, I was imagining my family, friends back home, including my Uncle Dan, who, as you said, he was this lifelong Bostonian, kind of everything you love and loathe about Boston. He was all those things wrapped into one. He was a staunch conservative, not a fan of President Obama. Thanksgiving dinners really got interesting. We would really get into it. And so, I thought, well, what if on that day, at that moment of remembrance and at that service, how could Barack Obama connect with someone like my uncle? What did someone like my uncle need to hear at that moment? What was he feeling? And I didn't call him. I didn't reach out to him, but I knew him, and I knew what would resonate with him. And so the speech very much became what someone later called a love letter to Boston. It was a celebration of that city, its history, its heritage, its sports teams, its traditions. And so when it was, and that's the speech that the president, as always, completely rewrote what I wrote and made it his own. But when it was all over, I got a voicemail from all people, my uncle, and in his thick Boston accent, he said, "I just wanted you to know I heard the president's speech, and he gave a very fine speech." And then he hung up. That was about as much. That was about as much as he was ever going to say about Barack Obama. But it was a great sort of lesson that there are ways that we connect with each other. We live in such a divisive, divided time where almost everything in our lives gets politicized in some way. But that's not there. There's so many other ways to connect with people in our audiences, at our workplaces, in our families, in our communities. And so that's what I hope readers take away from that story. That there are ways. If you think deeply about a particular person and really deliver your presentation for them, I think you're much more likely to break through and connect with the larger audience that you're trying to reach.
Well, for me, that was a big part of that section. I have it in my notes here. I'm reading off of my highlights on my Kindle, by the way.
Sure.
I put, when you give a speech, find your Uncle Dan. And that, I went on a tangent on that one. I'm like, okay, got it. Uncle Dan. Because you're speaking, like you said in the book, you're speaking to their experience. And I think this is what we forget, right?
Right.
We want to connect.
That's the essence of empathy, right? And something I think we've lost. I think in any time that we have to get up as a person, again, in the workplace, in our families, in our neighborhood meeting, in our local, our town hall meeting, we're often so focused on what we want to say, what the point is that we want to make. And obviously, I talk about that. You have to have a point. You have to know what it is, why you're getting up and speaking. But I think the thing that so many people miss is they forget the other half, that there is an audience there. And every audience is different. And if you don't think deeply about who your audience is, their experiences, their worldview, then you're really missing an opportunity to connect with them. I teach speech writing at American University here in DC, and one of the lessons I tell them is give them is, okay, so imagine you're a speaker and you've got maybe you're a member of Congress or something, or a leader of an organization, and you know what you're about. You have your agenda. You have the things that you're looking to achieve in the course of your work. But On Monday you get invited to speak to the NAACP, one of the great civil rights organizations in this country. And
Hmm.
then Thursday you're invited to speak to the Fraternal Order of Police, one of the great law enforcement organizations in our country. Now, you haven't changed. Your belief and core values haven't changed. But if you are you would be making a profound mistake if you just get up and read the same speech presentation to those two audiences, right? You would come at it an entirely different way. You would stay true to your values and your vision and your voice, but you would think deeply about what motivates these two different communities and how you might be able to connect with that. And so that's a big lesson of the book, and I think that's one of the things that for those of us who lament how divided our country is, I think too few leaders, especially in the political space, communicate like that anymore. So much of it is just, they're appealing to their side, their base, and not trying to listen to what other people bring to this, the life experiences of other people, of other Americans. So one of the lessons that I hope people take away from this book is, this book will give you tools for how to communicate. And it's true in our workplaces, right? Now, especially in our workplaces, like we
Yes.
work, our workplaces transcend politics and all sorts of cultural divides, which is why it's so hard for so many leaders and CEOs to communicate these days, is because we choose to work where we work not because of our politics or our cultural background in most cases. And so this is something that I think is especially challenging for leaders of business and organizations.
So on a work level, by the way, I agree with you. We're so divided right now, and I feel like no one takes the time to think about how the other person, what the other person's experience is, right? How they're viewing the world. And you definitely lay that out in the book, and I found that very valuable.
I
But when
appreciate
we're
it.
looking at this on a business level,
Hmm.
I'm thinking as a business owner or somebody going and doing a pitch, a presentation, when you're trying to win business,
Right,
and, and you see those that approach it, we're like, hey, these are all the amazing things that we do. Here are the benefits, here are the features, and then they fall flat. Versus, just like you said, they take the time to understand who they're speaking to, and then they speak to what they need. And then all
right,
of a sudden it switches. That's why I was like, this is brilliant. This is why I said it's a manual before we started. I'm like, this is a manual.
right.
So
Yeah, no, I think you go back, look at all some of the great business leaders of all time. And I have a section of the book where I talk about this, right? Is if all you're getting up and doing is saying, here's the product, here's the features, here's the benefit, here's how
yeah,
I can help you. I mean, you can get pretty far. I mean, if you got a great product that actually answers people's needs, fills a void, fills a gap, then you will be successful to a point. But when you look at the truly great leaders, business leaders throughout history, they're offering more than a product. They're offering a vision. They're offering a value set. And you look at Steve Jobs, right? When he gets up and he unveils the iPhone, he wasn't just out there pitching some new device. He famously said he wanted to reinvent the phone. And when you look at why people wait in line for hours every time there's a new model that comes out, or some of the one of the companies with great brand reputation. I talk in the book. I talk about Patagonia.
yeah.
Consistently has one of the highest brand reputations in the country. And you look at why is that? Well, it's not just because people like their gear. They make great gear, and other people like their gear too. But they offer a vision, a value set. People know that when they buy from Patagonia, they're giving their money to an organization that truly defends the earth and stands up for conservation. If that's important to you, then it makes sense that you give your money to. And I talk about, so basically, I think great companies, great organizations offer more than just a product. They offer a value. They offer, and I don't mean monetary value. I'm talking about, and I talk about a lot of different organizations. I talk about Chick-fil-A in the book. You know, um, my family and I eat from Chick-fil-A all the time. We love their food. That's why we go. That's why most people go. However, they are a very unique organization. Their founder and their founding, and as everyone knows, they're not open on Sunday because they embrace and embody a value set that is very appealing to a lot of people who prioritize their Christian faith in this country. And so they want to give their business to they're not just giving their business because they like the chicken sandwiches. They're doing it because they feel that that organization represents something that's important to them. So I think, I in a lot of the workshops that I do, I'll advise speechwriters and executive communication teams that work for CEOs, and oftentimes they'll tell me all my CEO wants to do is talk about the product. And I
Yes.
how are those presentations? They're like, they're awful. They're boring. They don't want to bring their own story to it. That's one of the big lessons of the book. It's not just about the product. It's about you. It's about who you are, your story, why your employees come to work, what your values are, what your core values are as an organization. That all goes into it. And I know, I think, ultimately there's limits to this. I don't think people choose their gas station based on the life story of the CEO or the value set. But I think there are a lot of examples in our life where it works. And so I'm always encouraging, particularly business leaders, to step out. It's a little uncomfortable at times, but to bring your whole person to your pitches, who you are, why you do this, because ultimately people they're not just buying a product, they're buying a relationship.
I think that's the key right there. And this is what, and you may have thought about this, Terry, but when you're saying they buy into a relationship, I think more so now with social media, where you have where for me, if I put up a video, it's for me, it's just like I don't even know who it's going to hit. But for
Right.
the person watching it, it's a one-to-one thing, right? For me, it's one to many, but for them, it's that one relationship at a time. And I think this is where I found your book even more valuable because I'm thinking we really need to look at this if we have any type of presence on social media where we're showing our face and we're talking.
Right.
You said something, what was it here? Um, there was a section I wrote it down. I said as I was reading this, I found that the majority of these lessons were great, not just for speaking, but for how to run your social media outlets. And that
Right.
was, I was like, because we talk about, you talk about authenticity, we talk about authenticity and
Right. Right.
sincerity.
Well,
And
that's
I just never thought of before I make a YouTube video, hey, take a step back, Tristan. Let's do exactly what Terry said here.
correct.
And you made me think deeper.
Yeah, what's interesting is that I've spent so much time over the years and working with elected officials, politicians, candidates, business leaders, and a lot of them get it. They get that it's not, we see this particularly at the presidential level. I think we all know this. Like, we're not just voting for a set of policies.
Mhm.
We're voting for a person, the person that we want to look at, listen to, hear from every day for the next 4 years. And candidates that only think it's about a set of policies are going to lose. And candidates that really lead and put themselves out there. Again, back to what we were just talking about a minute ago in business. The business leaders who say, I'm not going to get personal. I'm not going to talk about my life story. I'm not going to about how I came to this work. I'm just going to get up there. I represent a company. Those leaders will not resonate enough. But interesting to your point, social media is all about brand and authenticity, right?
Mhm.
It's all about. I mean, it's almost it's too much in the other direction, right? It's so personality based.
Ah,
When you and just listen to the way we talk about social media, or when our kids talk about social media, they're talking about people. They're not saying I follow this interesting person who talks about how to save money. They talk, oh, I follow so and so.
mm,
They feel a connection with that person, and so successful. I haven't thought about it either, but successful social media is built for this, right? In all sorts of good and bad ways, because it is. You feel like it's one on one. You are sitting there by yourself, often watching someone. You feel like they're speaking to you. And the more they speak to you, the more it resonates. So, I mean, I think, yeah, we could probably take a lesson from that as communicators. I wouldn't take too many lessons from social media personalities. But yeah, I think again, they want a connection. And again, I get this question a lot. How should I use a bot? Should I use Chat GPT or whatever to write a presentation? My answer is almost always no. Don't do that. You are a human being trying to connect with other human beings, have a human experience. Your audience of humans wants a human speaking to them. So the more you can do that. The more authentic you can be, the more of your own self that you can bring to your presentations. Tell those stories from your own experience that only you can tell. That's a big lesson of the book. Say what only you can say. Don't be generic. Think about your life and the stories that only you can share. That's what people want. That's what they remember. That's why they'll choose to partner with you or do business with you.
That's true, man. That's very true. And as we're talking about structuring a speech, just so that if somebody's listening in and they're thinking, "Hey, I've got to do a toast for a wedding, or I've got a quick little 5-minute presentation that I have to do, and I'm freaking out, and it's only for 5 people, and I'm sweating bullets." I
Right.
want to go over your 50-25-25 rule because
Right.
that goes for everything. I loved that. I was like, oh, lots of highlights, lots of notes.
Right.
So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest mistakes that all of us make, again, whether we're creating a 50-minute presentation at a keynote conference, or as you said, a 3 to 5 minute toast, is we get anxious, we get nervous, we have to produce something, and so there's nothing more terrifying for many of us than a blank page or a blank computer screen, and so we start just putting down our thoughts, we start writing, and what I see over and over again is that that people start writing before they start thinking. They start creating before they start thinking. They haven't really thought through deeply what it is they're trying to do and they hit a wall. So like you can start writing a few sentences, a few paragraphs, even a few pages maybe, but you're going to hit a wall because at some point you realize I haven't thought this through. I don't know where this is going. So the 50-25-24 rule is just sort of my own rule of thumb that I use, that I encourage my clients to use, that I teach my students. And so the basic idea is no matter how much time you have, whether it's a month, 2 months, a week, a few days, a few hours, you don't have to write anything right away. Spend however much time you have, just spend maybe the first 50% of your time just thinking, writing down ideas, brainstorming, researching, talking to other people, getting ideas, not creating, not writing, but just brainstorming, using that time to truly think about what it is you want the audience to remember, and then only then maybe spend the next 25% of your time actually doing the writing. And you will find that having done all that heavy thinking and outlining and research, the writing goes much easier. If anything, you probably have an embarrassment of riches. You have more ideas than you know what to do with. And then the third step is one that I think so many people fail to do, which is building in time, maybe 25%, to practice, to edit, to share it with your colleagues, so your team leaders. I've worked with companies where the CEO has to give the speech at 6 p.m. on a Friday, and it's 4 p.m. No one's seen the presentation, and then it suddenly gets circulated. And hey, what do you all think? Well, at that point, it's too late. You can't say, well, this is terrible. This is completely wrong. There's no time to fix it. So, but you build in 25% of your time or so to share it, circulate it, edit it, so that if it is terrible, you have time to make it better. So, and that works, again, 50-25-25, whether you have several months, several weeks, several days, several hours. And I find it just brings some structure to an otherwise a process that can be very unnerving and terrifying to people. And when I teach this, when I teach at the university level, I encourage my students to do this, and they've told me it's been transformative because again, it takes all that stress and anxiety that you have at the beginning. Oh my God, I need to start writing right now. No, you don't. The most important thing you do, I think the most important predictor of success of any sort of presentation is actually not what you do at the podium, at the microphone. It's the work you do before you ever write a single word. It's all that thinking. And we know this. We've all sat through presentations. You're like, great speaker, interesting slides. No there. There's no substance. There's no interesting idea. There's no idea that's challenged me, and that's when that important work you do in that first 50% of your time. So I call it the 50-25-25 rule.
That's a great rule, man. As I was reading this, the thing that I found for me personally, and I don't know if any of the people that are listening to this, when they pick up the book and read it, that they'll find it. I was like, you put words to a lot of the things I was feeling. I was like, oh, you know what? I do that, but I didn't even know that there was. So like the whole book was like that, the whole thing.
Great.
And I was like, this is brilliant. That's why I thought it was brilliant.
There you go.
And there was not only the 50-25-25, because I was thinking, I'm like, okay, a lot of the time I do spend like, okay, what am I going to talk about before I put anything into writing?
Right.
I was like, oh,
Good.
I'm just going to use his rule. So I'm going to use your rule now, Terry. And
Great.
then the other piece to this, which I had never put words to, was the rhythm, the almost like a song, the
Right.
poem, right? And I mean, you had amazing experience with that, and I thought, wow, that makes sense. I've been watching other people say certain phrases and have a certain rhythm, and it feels, you know who? Tony Robbins.
Hmm.
When I've talked to him or we've interviewed him, sometimes he has these little catchphrases, right? And the catchphrases are memorable because it breaks it down for me to be able to remember it. And then with that one catchphrase, I remember everything else. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about rhythm and words, and I was like, man, this is you outlined it for me in this whole thing. This is
Very good.
great.
Great. No, I
So
appreciate it.
how important how important has that part been to speech writing? Because I've never read it anywhere else. The rhythm part, the poetry, the singing, that.
Sure. Well, so what I was trying to do there is I go back to one of the early lessons of the book that, standing up, giving any sort of a presentation to, again, a group of people, it is, um, a lot of speech coaches say, well, it's not a performance. Don't think about it as that. It's just about the content. I fundamentally disagree. If you, again, you're a human being standing up in front of other human beings, um, like it or not, that is part of it. That part of that is the performative aspect of it. Is something the president would often would mention to me, and I include in the book. So the question then becomes, a speech, a presentation, a pitch is unlike any sort of other content. It's not an article that you read in a magazine or newspaper. It's not a policy paper. It's not the morning news that you might sit there with your coffee and flip through the pages alone. Uh, Presentations, pitches, speeches are communal experiences. It's a group of people coming together in a common space to experience something together. Your job as a presenter, as a speaker, is to create an experience for people. And part of it, and I talk about all the different ways you can do that to create a memorable experience for your audience. One of the ways that we can do that at, I think, a more advanced level for those who are interested in it is the rhythm, is the cadence, is the poetry of our presentations. Um, and one of the ways, and people say, well, how do you, I'm not a Barack Obama, I'm not a Ronald Reagan. How do you, I can't do that. Well, actually, you can. And one of the ways that I always do it with my clients, and I teach this to my students, is to write your script out like a poem, like a song, in stanzas. Because number one, what that does is that what that means is, start every sentence flush on the left margin like you would a poem or a song, and leave a space between every line. And what that immediately does is, number one, you can see when a sentence starts to get really long. If you have a sentence that goes on for 3 lines, that's going to be a very hard sentence to deliver, to speak. Again, presentations and speeches, these are auditory experiences we have to deliver. The line has to be readable to the speaker. It has to be deliverable. It has to be intelligible. you know,
Yeah.
so if you have a sentence that runs on for 3 or 4 or 5 lines, I mean, good luck delivering that.
Yeah.
Another, so it forces you to keep your sentences short, keep them tight. You can see patterns. We talk a lot about repetition and the great Churchillian phrases. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the fields. You see when you can see a phrase or a word repeated several times in a line, you can see the repetition, and so it's a way of just sort of breaking it down. If you write out your script like you would write out a letter or an article, you can't see which sentences are long and which sentences are short. You can't see, but this is a way of when you write like a poem or a song. And I think actually Churchill, I found out more recently, did this, which is interesting. I didn't know he had done this, but it makes sense. You can't help but see patterns and the rhythm and the structure of your presentation. So it's a really simple way to do something that sounds really hard to do.
All
Be
right. So I'm going
especially
to take,
effective for like eulogies and toasts and things like that.
so there's a lot to this. This was for me, it was my favorite chapter, not because it provided the most value or what I think benefit to the reader. For me personally, it was a big aha, man. I was like, oh, that's it. That's right there. That's it for me. And I was thinking, because there's a lot to this. You also, earlier in the book, before that section, I think you mentioned about presentations, about having all these stats and all the, and then you're like, you know what? If you can help it, don't do it, right? Because it's a distraction. And I agree with you because I've watched a couple of my friends never use presentations and then they have the audience in their hands because
Right.
like you said, it's communal, right? It's like, here we go, right? Hang on because it's arrived and it's a performance. I love that word, Terry. Magnificent word for this whole thing.
Right.
So for me, it was just eye-opening and just beautiful. And I was like, this is going to be, now I understand this better. You gave me more clarity to something I wanted to understand better.
Oh,
So
great. I appreciate that. Yeah, and
yeah,
I hope folks try it. Again, I teach it to my students, and I actually grade them on it. We take Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, one of the most lyrical, poetic speeches, presentations, pitches ever written, and I have them break it down into a poem and a song to listen to where he pauses and where he breathes, and it's just it's remarkable. You everything that if you've ever everyone has heard little clips of that speech. I encourage everyone to take 15-20 minutes and actually listen to the whole thing. Um, when you break it out like this, you can actually see the patterns, and it's something we can all do. And it's again, so yeah, I'm trying to take this big thing that oratory and speaking and public speaking and I want to sound like Ronald Reagan or Barack Obama or whoever. Here's how you can do it. Here are some simple things that you can do in your own life, in your own work, that will, I think, make you more compelling and more memorable.
now I got a lot of lessons from this. And then one of the things I did do, you mentioned in the book, you're like, hey, you should go out and take a look at all of these great speeches.
That's
And
right.
so I went ahead and did that. I was like, why didn't I think of that? Right. So I was like, they're everywhere. So I just went to download a few speeches and then I started reading them. And I was like, this is great. You convinced me for anytime I do presentations in person or anywhere else to write them out. And I'm the guy type of person who outlines
Sure.
only, right? And then I'm like, I'm just going to go off of my human experience, right?
Right.
Outline, here we go. But you were convincing because you're like, hey, look, if you write this out, you're gonna get those values that you want executed at a really high level. And
Right.
then for me, the rhythm part, I was like, oh, I was missing the rhythm part. That's what I was missing.
This is
Um,
one of the sort of big debates everyone's in the public speaking spaces. Do you write it out or not? And great speakers, great communicators don't write it out. They don't read the presentation. I fundamentally disagree with that, and I think that, as I argue in the book, I think your audience deserves your best. They're
yeah.
taking time out of the, a lot of them. Sometimes it's a company and they're forced to sit and listen to you, but most cases, people are choosing to be in your audience. They've taken time out of their busy lives and days and work to listen to you. You owe them a well prepared, well constructed, well executed presentation. Now, I recognize that life is busy and you can't write out every single line of every single presentation all the time. But I do think there's, as I explain in the book, there's so many reasons for writing it out. And one of the reasons is that it really forces you to think deeply about your arguments, the points you're trying to make. And even if you don't plan to read it word for word later, that exercise of going through and thinking through it exposes the strengths and weaknesses of your argument. When you're talking, we kind of bounce around sometimes between ideas. Your audience doesn't want you to bounce around. They want a well constructed, well structured argument or presentation. And sometimes until you see it on the piece of paper, you're like, oh, wow, uh, point one doesn't really lead to point two. In my mind, it kind of did, but
Uh,
we went through this. The president was always um, very insistent, of course, that we write these down. And I think winging it is usually a recipe, an invitation for disaster. Uh,
Well,
and and
yeah.
people say, if they don't want you to, I've heard people say, well, your audience doesn't want to be read to. Um, and I think I just, again, I mean, we've all been captivated, and it's not, it's more about the content and the quality, right? You can have a, a, we've all been to church or synagogue or temple, and we've heard a beautiful, powerful homily or presentation, and they're written down and they're delivered because someone took the time to think through and had something important to say. And then we've all sat through rambling, incoherent presentations where the person clearly didn't take the time to think through.
Yep.
The warning flag I always tell people to watch out for is when, if you're sitting in a presentation and the speaker says, "Oh, but I digress," that per that
Oh,
person is realizing in real time that they have just gone off on a detour that has nothing to do with the presentation that they're there to hear. That is someone who has not taken the time to write it down. And I find again, your audience deserves your best. Give them your best. Take the time, prepare it out, write it out. Now, I give a lot of presentations. They tend to be one of 4 or 5 sort of core stump speeches, if you will, that I have. And while I may not be reading it out in that moment from a script, it is based on a script that I've worked on and developed and refined before I go out and give the presentation. So sometimes I might have it and I might read it word for word if the situation allows for it. But yeah, so a big part of the book is you've got to write it out. You've got to don't wing it. I have a lot of examples in there of people who try to wing it. It usually doesn't go very well.
Yeah, I agree, man. And even when it's your own story. So I went through when I finished your book, I went back and then I looked at some of my personal stories because you always say make it your own, right?
Mhm.
So I looked at my personal stories and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write some of these out because a lot of the times I'm winging those stories, but I bet they're more impactful if I do what Terry just told me to do.
Right.
And I started outlining those and I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't see the correlation. In fact, I didn't see that connect to this story over here years
Right.
later. So yeah, I 100% agree with you now. Before I didn't.
Right. Right. No, and I hear people all the time, "Oh, never read your speech." That's I'm like, well, yes, I mentioned this in the book. I even have a friend who writes out his annual, I think it's his like Christmas toast that he gives to his family over the holidays
Mhm.
or birthdays. He'll take, because he knows that to stand up in front of his family on an important occasion, someone's anniversary, someone's birthday, the holidays, is an important moment for a family. And if you just
Yeah,
get out, and so he spends a lot of time. He actually writes out all of his dinner toasts, and he practices them.
that's
And
cool.
now he doesn't read them in the moment when he's standing there around the table with 10 people. I mean, you could if you wanted to, if you some things that you really want to say and get right. And he told me that his family has come to cherish those moments because they know he's put in the time. It's clearly
Yeah.
something he cares about. He's thought deeply about what those people mean to him. And so, yeah, I just think it's really important. Our family, our friends, our coworkers, our neighbors, um, they deserve our best.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Part of that, going back to something you said, and I don't remember what part of the book it's in, but you're telling us to talk like a human. And it sounds so like, well, Terry, how
Of
else would I
course.
talk?
Right.
I've seen people not all of a sudden get in front of the camera or do a speech. All of a sudden, they're not talking human anymore. It's like robotic. So talk
Yeah.
to me about that and how we can get comfortable talking like a human.
Well, the whole chapter is called "Talk Like a Human," and it's just my it's my personal tirade based on 30 years in this space against the jargon and the bureaucracies and just the buzzwords that just have come to really infect so much of our discourse.
Mm,
Particularly in government and business and the nonprofit world. And I try everybody watching this knows exactly what we're talking about. Around every company, every sector, every industry, there's all sorts of words and phrases that have popped up that everyone thinks are so meaningful, paradigm shifts, and I mean, I have a whole list of them in the book. All this jargon that we think makes us sound smart, and really all it does is just confuse our audience. It does not lead to greater understanding. Does not make us sound smart. And so one of the core lessons of the book is, yeah, talk like a human. And one of the lessons that I share is what I call the barbecue rule. So, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
imagine when you're giving a presentation, particularly in work, you know, imagine if you were at a barbecue with your family and friends, your grandmother, your uncle, your 14-year-old niece or nephew, and they ask you what you do for a living. Or how's work? And you say, oh, work. You wouldn't say things like, well, I'm leveraging innovation to maximize positive outcomes for greater synergistic benefits
Yeah.
that lead to, but yet that is exactly what so much of the business world and nonprofit world and government we
Terry,
really
I'd stop talking to you at that barbecue. I'm like, okay, thanks, man.
well, that's exactly right, and yet that's exactly how we tend to talk to each other in the workplace. You do that at a barbecue, everyone's gonna be walking away. They're grabbing another drink because you're insufferable, and also your niece or your nephew doesn't understand anything that you're saying. And I say that because, like it for fair or unfair, um, the average reading level in this country is around the eighth grade level, about a 13 or 14-year-old.
Mhm.
So if and it turns out a lot of State of the Union addresses, interestingly, are written at around the eighth grade level. We didn't do that intentionally. We're not sitting there going, "Well, this sentence is written at the ninth grade level. We need to, tone it down a little bit." But the point is to make your presentations as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. If they can't understand you, they're not going to partner with you and buy
Mhm.
from you and work with you. I had someone tell me once, well, if 90% of my audience understands what I'm saying, I'm good with that. And I'm thinking, no, don't that you shouldn't be good with that at all, because in that
No.
10% of the audience that doesn't understand you, it doesn't understand that phrase or that term, that could have been your next customer. That could have been your
Wow.
next investor, your next partner. And if they're sitting there scratching their head and going, I don't know what this person's saying, then you've just missed an opportunity. You've left money on the table. They're not going to donate to your organization. They're not going to invest in you. So yeah, you want to strive for 100% understanding 100% of the time, and really speaking to people like you would, at a barbecue, uh, simply, clearly, like a human. Um, you will have more success in the workplace as well. And I lay out all sorts of different sort of ways to being careful not to be using too many acronyms, too many double negatives. There's all sorts of things in the book that I try to encourage people to do. But
For
yeah,
me,
it's a talk like him. It sounds like a low bar, and yet so many of us fail to meet it every single day, and so many leaders, particularly in business, fail to meet it. You know,
yeah, look, I'll tell you, sometimes I don't know. I want to sound smart, right? And it's
but
like I forget. And I'm like, no, 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 talk. This is why this is why I've been recommending your book. I'm thinking like, man, I've it goes back to think about Uncle Dan, right? I'm thinking most of the time when I show up and I talk to a specific audience, and this is not in person, but on social, I feel like I'm talking to my daughter, right?
right,
And it makes it easier for me to relax and to just speak, right? It's like, and that helps a lot for me. And I remembered that with Dan. I was like, I need to do that more.
right. Yeah,
So
yeah. Imagine speaking to your 14, a 13-year-old niece or nephew or son or daughter or child. Again, I'm saying this is not. I am not arguing that we need to dumb down our communication. That's not. We have a lot of smart 13, 14-year-olds. What I'm
yeah,
talking about is making our language universal.
that's it.
And the more people we can connect with, the more successful we'll be.
That's it, man. All right. So I have a couple of questions for you about your growth and working with President Obama.
Sure.
So there was a part in the book where someone you would always send out those speeches for a lot of people to check, to fact check.
Right.
One of those came back to you while you were having dinner somewhere, I believe, and somebody said, "Hey man, you got the country wrong. It's not Iraq, it's Afghanistan," I believe it was.
Right.
and you're like, oh crap, right? And so they got there in time to change it on the teleprompter for President Obama. And I thought the first thing I thought was, damn, that's a lot of stress, anxiety, but at the same time, a lot of growth.
Yeah.
Tell me about the amount of growth you had because of the pressure applied to you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, book has a lot of examples like that where, you don't get a whole lot of margin for error when you're writing for a president, in part because, it's a political environment and you make a mistake and your political opponents use it as a stick to beat you with for the next 4 years, And so, yeah, there was very little margin for error. And there were a lot of moments where we came within minutes or seconds of having the president say something that maybe was not correct or factual, and as that would have been on us. So, I think number one, I recognize that sort of every day that I was there at the White House was sacred. I knew that I could be I could be fired at any time. We have a phrase at the White House. You serve at the pleasure of the president, which is a very simple way of saying all the normal laws and labor protections that protect you as a normal person don't apply. You can, if the president is not pleased today, you can be fired tomorrow, and it happened. It happens all the time. We see it in the news, and
Mm.
folks just folks just disappear. A colleague you've been working with is suddenly not there anymore. The president was not pleased. So I think learning to be very grateful for the opportunity that we had to be there, and I was there for almost the full 8 years. But then also knowing that you got to you got to do your best every day. You cannot mail it in. You cannot phone it in. There was no coasting. We were on one of the biggest stages in the world, and I think it made us every day want to do our best. Again, whether folks watching this sort of liked Barack Obama or not, or agreed with his policies or not, at least I can speak for my team and the folks that I worked with. We cared deeply. We did try very hard to get it right every single day. We had fact checkers who just put every word, every sentence through the ringer every day, and we got into all sorts of struggles and battles to try to how could we say what we wanted to say as simply and as clearly
Mhm.
as possible, but always being factually correct. And were we perfect? Of course not. We made mistakes, and he gave over 3,000 speeches in 8 years, and yeah, there were mistakes that were made, and we had to correct them and answer for them. But we tried very hard, and so yeah, I think patience also. I always tell people this. Can you imagine being president of the United States? The pressures on you every single day. I mean, almost none of us can imagine what that is like. But in all those 8 years that I was there, never once did Barack Obama, raise his voice at me or my team. He never lost his cool. If he felt we just hadn't delivered the speech that he wanted, if he didn't think it was up to par, he didn't rip us apart. He didn't start demeaning us. He didn't start putting us down. He was kind of like the disappointed dad. He said, "Hey, come on in. We've got a few days to make this better. I don't have to give this speech
Mhm.
today." And he'd send us back to do our work. So I learned a lot about leadership and how to be a manager from the president of the United States, because I know how he treated us, and I try to treat the people around me and the people I work with the same way. So I would like to think, I hope that I'm a better person, a better manager, a better colleague because of that experience. Where again, giving yourself some grace and giving your colleagues some grace, that if people are trying their best, they're not always going to get it right. You're going to make mistakes, and how you treat people in those moments. It says a lot about you, but it also says a lot about the kind of culture that your organization is trying to create.
There's a lot there, man. I have two questions on that. How did you, over the almost 8 years you were there, how did you progressively get better at showing up your best?
Yeah, actually, what was interesting is when you're there that long, you find yourself writing the same things over and over again. Veterans Day, Memorial Day, Fourth of July, uh, Thanksgiving. Things. There's a cycle and a rhythm. There's certain things that a leader has to do every year. And so,
Mhm.
I was a foreign policy, national security speechwriter. So we found ourselves writing, yeah, Memorial Day, Veterans Day speeches, speeches to veterans conventions every year, and by the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth year at the time, you're like, my God, I've done this 5 or 6 times. How can it be different? How can it be better? And I actually found the last few years to be the most fulfilling because precisely because of that. It forced us to be more creative and more different. Okay, we've done this 6 times.
Mm.
How can we make the seventh time different? Maybe there's a story out there that we haven't found, or maybe there's an experience that the president has had that we can bring to bear on this. So it became harder, but that made it more challenging and made it more fulfilling. And I actually think some of if you make a list of some of President Obama's greatest speeches, a number of them come from the last few years at a time when people think, oh
Ah,
well, it's as the people would say, oh, it's the fourth quarter, but as President Obama would often say, interesting things happen in the fourth quarter, and so
mm,
so
that's
yeah,
funny.
it was doing it the sixth or seventh or eighth time forced us to be more creative, which I appreciated. It was a
All right.
challenge.
I like that. And then the other piece that I noticed as you were saying this, that there's a lot of uncertainty in your job while you're there. You mentioned that you don't know if your friends will even be there, right? Because you're pretty much there at the will of the president.
Right.
You probably got comfortable super quick or maybe a little bit longer with uncertainty, a lot more than you were used to before.
Sure.
How did that How did that transition through COVID for you? Because that was the most uncertainty we've ever seen. Were you ready for that because you've been in that environment for 8 years?
Mm. Well, I'm trying to think. By the time COVID came along, I was out of government. It was just me and my
Yeah.
family and my work. But yeah, I think the one of the everyone's familiar with the Serenity Prayer, right? To
Yep.
know the difference between the things you can control and the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I go back to that a lot because that was especially true at the White House, where you have this sort of swirl of national and world events. There's just so much that we could not control every day. You'd go into work with a plan that you're going to work on these three things today, and then there's something horrible that happens in the world, a hurricane, a tornado, a terrorist attack, a mass shooting. All of a sudden, everything you thought you were going to work on that day is pushed to the side, and you're scrambling to deal with something else, a crisis. And if you are not, if you're somebody who can only work, can only be successful when you're sticking to the plan, you're probably not going to be very successful in a place like the White House or for any organization that has to deal with the world, right? And so I think one of the things that I did learn, and I think I'm better at now than when I started, and what I would encourage everyone to do, which is really always be, distinguishing between the things you can control and the things you can't. We spend a lot of time in our lives worrying about, being anxious about things we can't control, and there's no amount of worry that's gonna let you control things you can't control. So I say, put your time and your effort into the things you can control, and manage and do and accomplish and complete, and recognize that every day things are going to get thrown at you in our families, in our work, in our neighborhoods that are unexpected, and just plan for the unexpected, expect the unexpected. And when it happens, you're a little bit less thrown off, and I think, given the sort of pace of events in our country and the world, if you're reacting to every single thing that you hear on the news or that you see or that happens, and you're treating everything like a magnitude 10 crisis, you just can't function.
No.
You can't. So you have to, that's how. So again, we would do that. Like I said, the Uncle Dan story, Boston Marathon. We came to work on a Monday. We were working on whatever it is we were working on, and by middle of the day, we're dealing with a national security crisis that then became the focus of our week. And if you got to be nimble, you got to you know I think you just have to accept the fact that there's just so much of what goes on in our lives, our personal lives, our professional lives, are things we just can't control. And I think I actually find that liberating. I know a lot of people find that terrifying, right? But once you accept the fact that there's so much outside of our control, I'm gonna focus on here are the three things that I can control, and from that I can make some progress.
It's very stoic, man. Almost like Marcus Aurelius here.
I
I like
I don't know any other way to do it. I mean, I see people around me running around with their heads, hair on fire. When we panic, we don't think clearly. When we're stressed, we don't think clearly. We don't make good decisions. I mean, it's true for nations. It's true for individuals. It's true for families. Um, yeah, I've got to, you come in and yeah, I mean, you work at the White House. I mean, the stuff that comes across your desk is just insane. You're working on one thing and someone says, you know, someone just drove a truck through a crowd of people and killed a lot of people.
yeah.
The president has to go out and speak to this in an hour, start writing, and stressing out. Oh, you just got to do your job. Um,
Last question for you.
sure.
Was there something after your book was published that you wish you would have included, or you're like, oh, you know what? That would have been so good, but next time.
Yeah,
What?
right, right.
Yeah.
Uh, there's no next time, by the way. This is it.
I know, I know. I'm just
People are
asking.
like, hey, your first book. I was like, no, my last book. I mean, right? We'll have a whole nother session about that. All of you out there who are thinking of writing a book, go for it. But it's gonna be a journey. I actually haven't had that, to be honest with you. I spent about 3 years working on this book. I had 3 years to think about what I wanted to include and what I didn't, and I knew that it would come out, in the fall of 2024. And I hope people are still reading it for years to come. I tried not to timestamp it. It's meant to be a guide and a book for people that I hope they can use for years to come. To be honest with you, I haven't. I had 3 years to make these choices about what I wanted to include and not, and I tried to pick the best material that I could.
Yeah.
There were things I had to cut, but I understand. Well, I'd overwritten.
So
Like a
you
lot of
cut
people do.
15%, huh?
Yeah, no, one of the lessons is that you got to always cut down 15% of your presentation. I had to do that with this book. So, no, I feel like I had something I wanted to. This goes back to the kind of the core lesson of the book, right? I knew what I wanted to say. I had thought a lot about it. Uh, I didn't want it to be just another historical analysis of presidential speeches. I didn't want it to be just here's what I learned from Obama. There's a lot in there about the neuroscience and the psychology of
Yep.
presentations and communications. There's a lot of just great stories in the book of just ordinary folks all over the country who've stood up and given just inspiring presentations at work, in their community, at their schools that I think we can learn from. And I'm thrilled the way it came there. I'm thrilled that people are finding it useful. I say I'm very active on LinkedIn. So I try to use LinkedIn. It's like the last nice place on the internet. I try to use it as a teaching platform. And so for anyone who's watching who wants to learn about public speaking and communication, I try to treat that as sort of an opportunity to share the lessons I learned, and I'll connect with anybody. And I'm looking to spread the lessons of this book and the lessons that I learned as far as I can. I just think they can be very helpful to people in their ordinary life, in our everyday lives.
I'll put the link to your LinkedIn in the show notes as well. And
Oh, great.
I think I followed you yesterday or the day
Yeah,
before.
that's great. Yeah, I saw that.
So there, and then, dude, yes, we didn't even talk about the the research that you quoted in the book. I highlighted a lot of that because I highlight all of the research on my Kindle notes with blue. This way I can just go blue and it's like all research.
Hmm.
So I saved that. One of those was the moral molecule. I was like, what is that? I was like, that's a whole different. You took me off on a tangent there, which was great. We won't even go into it there, but thank you.
Great.
That was a great job on writing this manual, this handbook to, I think, just showing up better in in a public setting. So I loved it a lot. Everyone, please pick it up. You're gonna love it. At the end of each chapter, he breaks down the highlights, what you should be focused on, just in case you missed it.
Right, right.
And I thought that was a great job. Say It Well. It could have been so many different titles, but Say It Well is what he ended up with. I was thinking, now I remember, Terry, I thought you could have titled it Cut 15%, and I would have been like, what's this?
Well,
So
now
good.
that yeah, now your audience has to read it. Yeah, that's one of the
Yeah,
lessons of the book, and
so good.
yeah, But no,
Yeah.
great conversation. I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for doing this, man.
Thank you.